The real working end of the 2012 prophecy, where we start to have the rubber meet the road, is looking at the solar system and seeing that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. When we start to look behind the veil, the hidden reality that we have, and we start seeing a deeper truth of ourselves and a deeper truth of what it means to be human on this planet, we come into contact with a body of information that has been kept secret for thousands and thousands of years. And the reason is that with this information comes the potential for what is called apotheosis. Apotheosis means human becomes God. The people who are in power believe themselves to be gods. They have inherited an ancient tradition which encourages the practice of developing your own spiritual faculty to a much, much greater level than most people ever do. And they have a variety of practices, very distinct practices, which are engineered to awaken your psychic center. In my previous video, which most of you have seen, 2012 Enigma, I show you visual evidence of the pineal gland symbolism in the pine cone. And I show you that symbolism all over the world, in all different traditions, Babylonian traditions, even in the Vatican. The largest statue in the square, which is called the Court of the Pine Cone, is huge. It dwarfs the size of a human being. Why would you put a pine cone on a big statue? Why did Jesus say in the Bible, "If thine eye be single, then thy body will be full of light"? If your eye is single, what does he mean by that? Does that mean that if somebody pokes your eye out that you're going to suddenly start glowing? No. Now, there is a whole religious conspiracy going on that says that Jesus never existed, that it was all a bunch of extrapolations based on various historical figures, then consolidated into what we now call the New Testament. And I would propose that it is impossible for such an outrageously enduring legend that so many people followed with such passion to have been concocted by some sort of mishmash of lesser spiritual figures who were all consolidated together. I do believe that these events happened. I do believe they've also been greatly misunderstood. When you see the greater reality that I am going to share with you in this presentation, you come to an understanding that your DNA did not randomly evolve on this planet. Your DNA is an energy pattern that exists throughout the entire cosmos. And that energy pattern is a wave. The ancients built the Great Pyramid as a focalizing device to harness that energy. I am proposing that the energy that makes your DNA takes natural materials that are all around, just molecules and atoms in space. It takes those atoms and molecules and it intelligently arranges them together to form the DNA molecule. Now, if that is true, then it means that everyone here in this room is created by an intelligent energy field. The center of the Milky Way galaxy is also a torsion field generator. Spherical torsion waves slowly expand away from the center, passing through stars and planets as they go along. As the solar system is impacted by these torsion fields, it charges up with energy, causing massive effects on the star and its planets, influencing them to become brighter, hotter, and more magnetic. These waves also have a stimulating and programming effect on the DNA molecule, ultimately rewriting the code of every life form on the planet. You now have just found the zone in which science and religion come together, in which you no longer have to take on arbitrary promises about there being a hereafter. Now you have proof that who you are and what makes you who you are came from something that is not physical, something that is vastly more intelligent and complex than we had ever imagined, and something that has been known about for quite a long time. There is no difference between biological life and inanimate matter except for the sophistication with which the energy that makes that matter is flowing. The rocks that make the pyramid are made of the same stuff that spirals in to make your DNA. It's just that the DNA is a much more intelligently spiraled version of that same energy, whereas the rock doesn't have as much structure. But the pyramid uses calcium carbonate, CaCO3. The basic matrix of limestone is quartz. And quartz is a crystal, so it has crystalline properties, which means as you get more and more crystallized in terms of a mineral, you're getting closer and closer to what becomes biological life than you had before. So a crystal is a very important conduit between the world of life as we know it and the world of the inanimate matter as we know it. That's an important point. Because what you have in the Great Pyramid is a device that harnesses this energy by a very simple process. You are going to see evidence in this presentation that demonstrates conclusively that the energy itself that makes physical matter has a fluid-like quality. It behaves as if it were a fluid. And with that fluid-like quality comes all of the basic behaviors that you get with fluids in movement, which would include a funnel. It's a very simple concept. If you have water that's pouring into a funnel, where's the fastest speed in the funnel going to be? Right at the bottom, right? That's where it's spinning the fastest. And the funnel is obviously going to take all that water and it's going to create a current through the funnel. So if every single calcium carbonate crystal inside the Great Pyramid is taking in this fluid-like energy and it's flowing through, now again, the flow is not happening in 3 dimensions of space. It's happening in 3 other dimensions, which is the time field. Okay, that's where things start to get complicated. If you want to find your higher dimensions, you look in time. Einstein assumed time was 1-dimensional. It's not. Time is 3-dimensional. That means you can go forwards, backwards, and sideways in time. And that gives us a really wonderful benefit because that means we can see stuff that hasn't happened yet. We can see potential realities. One of the weirdest aspects of esoteric teaching is the concept that when you see a future event, you are seeing a probable future event. You are not seeing the future. There is a very important difference because anything that you think might be happening in the future doesn't need to happen if you don't want it to happen. There are all these movies coming out about 2012 and about extraterrestrial intelligence, and they're all saying doom and fear and disaster and cataclysm is going to come to the earth. If the universe is powerful enough to create the DNA molecule intelligently from a wave, if there is that much sophistication, as you're going to see here, that life itself is divinely inspired, then why in the world would that same divine force that has intelligently brought us into being spontaneously decide to just have the sun belch off a big fireball and kill the whole planet? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that if there are ETs out there, that they would just be standing by and waiting for the planet to blow up, and that they're not going to do anything. So here's the riddle. If our DNA is intelligently structured by a wave, what does that say about the human body? Is this the only planet that a human body would form? Or is the human body
a design whose purpose is to express consciousness on a planet like the Earth. And if that were true, then what does that say about human beings that could be visiting us right now? I got news for you. I met Sergeant Clifford Stone in person. Sergeant Clifford Stone is a whistleblower who worked in significantly classified top-secret projects for our military and government. And his job, when he was called away from his normal duties in the military, was to visit sites where UFOs crashed. Now, 80% of the public believes that UFOs exist. It's no longer a myth, and it's no longer something that can be laughed at. It must be taken seriously, because anybody at this point who refuses to believe that UFOs exist is deluding themselves, because there is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence to suggest that they do. If even one photograph is not swamp gas, then we're not alone. Everything that you think you know about what ETs look like from movies is almost entirely a lie. There are no aliens. There are family members that look just like us. In fact, the farthest divergence you ever get from a human form is the typical gray physiology. The big head, the black eyes, the little nose, little mouth, tapered jaw. Nothing like my face. I have no relationship to that face. Most people are still wrestling with the question of whether these saucers even exist. And then if they get to the point that they exist, the simplistic idea would be, well, maybe they come from Mars, or maybe they come from Andromeda Galaxy, or maybe they come from... There is no maybe they come from. That implies one place. What I'm saying is that we have a whole galaxy full of human life that naturally evolves on planets wherever possible. In fact, in the Law of One material that I so often discuss, it says there are 67 million planets with humans like us at this dimensional frequency just in this galaxy. 67 million. How in the world do you tell the public that we are surrounded by human civilizations, most of whom who have ever been able to get to us have technology vastly superior to what we have? Anti-gravity, no problem. Limitless free energy that is clean and doesn't burn anything and doesn't pollute the atmosphere, no problem. It exists everywhere. Our guys in the inside government have had this for at least 50 years. And there is a convergence of discoveries that came from men like Nikola Tesla and John Keely and Townsend Brown that then dovetailed with crashed wreckage from extraterrestrial spacecraft. So look, things are not going to stay the way they are very much longer. The year 2012, if nothing else, represents a bifurcation point, a split between the way that things have been and the way that things are going to be. And if you don't think that there are other humans out there who are willing and able to welcome us into their community, then you're not paying attention. Star Trek apparently was channeled to Gene Roddenberry through a group that he was working with that had started in the 1950s and is part of what we're going to be getting to at the end of this talk. The Star Trek information is very accurate to what actually is known, which is that they do follow a so-called prime directive, and they will not interfere with a given planet's history until that planet is ready. So last year, there was the big hoopla about October 14th, right? Everybody said a 5-mile wide UFO is going to appear in the sky and it's going to hover there for 3 days. Well, first of all, a 5-mile wide UFO would completely kill all the grass over the people who it was hovering from, not to mention it would be so terrifying and the average person wouldn't know anything about it. And if any ETs were to channel that through one person, then that person basically has become a messianic figure. And they don't ever want to give somebody that much leverage. Because what they found in the 1950s was that if they did speak through certain human individuals, here on earth, that their egos would get inflated because now they felt special, they felt different, they felt like they were the anointed teacher. And so we're not allowed to have any one leader. There is not going to be a second coming of Christ. However, the Casey readings, one of many sources we're going to be discussing, are adamant in saying that the second coming of Christ is you. It's all of us. It is the awakening of the Christ principle in humanity. And I'm not trying to force Christianity down your throat. In fact, I'm going to give you some very important information here. Every single ancient tradition in history has documented records of angels and gods. The angels look like human beings, but they glow, they can levitate, they can read your mind, they can teleport from one place to another, they can manifest objects out of thin air, they can create manna from heaven. They have abilities that we would consider to be godlike. And every culture has these human extraterrestrials in their heritage. All religions are the truth. All religions are the truth. All religions have everything you need to follow the way of God, if that's what you want to call it. It doesn't have to be, my God is the only God. My God is the only right God. All it means is that you have a particular culture in a particular place in a particular time, and that culture had an enlightened teacher who took the knowledge of the universe and brought it through in his own personal or her own personal way. Because in fact, in ancient Greece, the prophets were not men, they were women. Every woman who was a prophet was named Sibyl. And the most famous Sibyl was the Sibyl of Cumae, spelled C-U-M-A-E. And she had a prophecy that came true regarding the coming of Jesus. In the Greek and in the Roman Empire, the women with the gift of prophecy were known as Sibyls, but none were as well known as the Sibyl of Cumae. She dwelled in a cave with multiple entrances and wrote her prophecies down on oak leaves. In the event that no one came to pick them up, they simply blew away. The Sibylline prophecy is widely respected as one of the harbingers of Jesus' arrival, but that was one of many things. The prophecy book was so accurate that in the Roman government, that was considered the highest treasure they had. There was nothing in the Roman government that was taken on with greater seriousness than the Sibylline prophecy scripture. The Sibylline mystery texts are one of many texts that describe a utopian world that is coming into being. In fact, every ancient mystical and spiritual tradition speaks of a golden age that is coming. And they don't speak about it in a bland, sophomoric fashion. They speak about it in an exciting, invigorating, eye-opening way because of the extent to which they say things will be changed. And you're going to see those prophecies at the end of this talk. The true law is unity, that all is love, all is one, all is light. But the first distortion of that law, the first spin that you have to look at as soon as you grasp that the universe is love, is the free will principle. And what that means is that there's only one of us here, there's only one being, but the greatest gift that that being has given us is the opportunity to discover that we are one with it in our own way, without anybody telling us what to believe or what to do or how to think. It simply is. It's our path, and we can do anything we want. We have the free will. If we start infringing on someone else's free will, it is a design of the universe that whatever we measure out to others will be measured back to ourselves. That's karma. So yes, you can practice the negative path if you want to. You can infringe on other people's free will. You can manipulate them, you can lie to them, you can control them, you can steal their money, you can leave them unemployed and homeless and hungry. But you will be stolen from, lied to, manipulated, controlled, beaten, abused, raped. And you have to be. The Mayan calendar is the primary vessel through which we have speculation that the year 2012 might be different than other years. That's the primary vessel that we have. But what I'm about to show you to open up the talk is that the Great Pyramid of Egypt actually has a timeline in it, and that timeline has 2012 as the most important year. Obviously, here's the Great Pyramid. You can see that there are passages inside, and that these passages are much more complex than what's inside all the other pyramids. The outside of the pyramid has a hollowed-in surface, which is very interesting because it could potentially bounce lasers off of it from space. Originally, the pyramid was covered in white limestone casing stones, which were so smoothly polished that it looked like it was pure marble sculpture, reflective marble with a perfectly flat face. This was not an object built by human beings on this planet with the technology that they had available at the time. Not at all. When the Great Pyramid of Giza was first built, it was covered with white limestone that was so highly polished it would shine like a mirror in the daytime. Over thousands of years, the pyramid degraded. The casing stones were dislodged by earthquakes and were eventually hauled off to build mosques in Cairo. The pyramid we know today has a flat top, which makes it a six-sided object. In Egyptian numerology, 6 is the number of imperfection. When the capstone is returned, the pyramid becomes a 5-sided object, which symbolizes divine initiation and the transformation of the world into a golden age. In this photograph, you can actually see that line of how precisely this thing was built, that it actually has that slight indentation going up the side. I want you to pay special attention to what are called the scored lines right here, because what we have is the fixation of a timeline. The timeline is fixed by an alignment where the pole star for its time, which was Alpha Draconis, shines down through the descending passage into the bottom, at the same time that the Pleiades constellation is directly overhead. The scored lines are where that conjunction is marked, and this conjunction only occurs at 2141 BC. That's the only time that both of those things happen, where the pole star can shine down the tube and the Pleiades are directly overhead. So the message is you start counting at 2141 BC. I'm not going to take the time right now to try to explain to you how the pyramid's timeline works, because it's extremely complicated. But what I will say is that it's all based on numerology. The number 1 equals one thing, the number 2 equals something else. And here's the list of what the different numbers do. Now you can find this list inside Peter Lemaisurier's book, Great Pyramid Decoded. What you'll see is that there's enough information in the different numerals and what they mean that it is possible to encode very complex messages that basically can say anything you need them to say, just using mathematical measurements. Measurements that are very simple, measurements that can be repeatable. In the Great Pyramid texts, there are actual texts associated with the Great Pyramid. They give you all these numerical meanings. So they give you the code. You actually have the legend that tells you how to read the map. Here they're doing a variety of tests of the numbers because you want to multiply numbers together, subtract numbers from each other, etc. And if one number means one thing and another number means something else, and then you subtract, the act of subtraction means you're taking something away. So that the subtraction becomes part of the message. Addition means you're adding to, subtraction means you're taking away from, multiplication means you are multiplying the effect of. So mathematics becomes a language. This is a full diagram of the various passages in the Great Pyramid. And the one that we're particularly interested in is the King's Chamber, because what we will see is that the pyramid timeline counts 1 inch, which is an Egyptian inch, not a regular English inch, slightly smaller. 1 inch equals 1 year. Now, the guy who wrote the book, Peter Lemaisourier, continues to use that system right up until the so-called Great Step. And he believes that the timeline should be changed when you get to this area of the timeline because, he says, at that point, it just doesn't make any sense that events would be happening so fast in time. that so many things would happen that are so profound and amazing in such a short period of time? Why not? Why not? What kind of arbitrary decision has been made to strip the timeline of the possibility that things could happen so fast? This is important because the descending passage is the one we look at first. And you can see the dates of the timeline here, AD 1440, 1521. And Le Mesurier ties in these dates to some very interesting historical stuff. Obviously, summer of AD 1914 is the exact time that we went into World War I, that war to end all wars. At that exact moment, the passageway no longer has a smooth, flat floor. It goes into this area in which the entire floor is what the people that studied the pyramid called unfinished. Because it quite literally is this bumpy, convoluted floor that you can't really walk on without worrying about spraining your ankle. It's not flat anymore. It's all bumpy and weird and distorted. The time that starts is 1914. And so what you have is you're looking at a prophecy that was put in stone, possibly over 10,000 years ago, if you believe scholars like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, who talk about the fact that the Sphinx is weathered with water that couldn't have been done unless it had been there for much longer than we take it credit for. The Great Pyramid, conventional dating is based on these quarry marks that they found in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. But those quarry marks were painted incorrectly. And they were painted incorrectly using all the mistakes that were in the book that the guy who discovered them had. Isn't that convenient? So, AD 2004 is when the bottom drops out of the world. That also is around the time of Hurricane Katrina. It's around the time that a lot more people started to suddenly wake up. 9/11, I think, is also included in this. I think 9/11 is the immediate precursor to what this pit is. And the pit also just represents the widespread understanding that there is great harm being done in the government and in the world. The Great Pyramid talks about 3 different paths that people take depending on where they're going. And this is worth looking at. The bottom path here, the subterranean passage, is materialism, the physical path of spiritual death for the masses of humanity. 2004, again, this book is from the 70s, shows that that's when we hit bottom. It's the ending of what happens in the beginning at 1914, which is the beginning of World War I, in which mechanized warfare allowed for much, much larger death than had ever been possible before. I mean, war was pretty crazy if you think about it before World War I, right? You got a bunch of guys standing there with guns, standing right in front of each other, bang, 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 and everybody's just falling down dead everywhere, right? But once you have an airplane, you can just cowardly go along, drop a big old bomb on somebody, and blow the hell out of them. So what started in World War I came to a conclusion of how bad it can get with the Iraq War in 2004, and this regime that seized power over the most powerful country in the world. The people who built the pyramid, ostensibly 10,000 years ago, knew that George Bush was going to be coming into power. They might not have known who he was. It's funny, right? But it's true. They knew that the overall timeline specified that that's when things were going to hit their worst point. And I also receive intuitive information. I'm one of those people who can channel. Take that for what you will, but it's very interesting that I received prophecies about the Bush administration coming into power before they did, telling me that in the 2000 election debacle between Bush and Gore, that Gore did not have a chance. The exact passage was, the vice president considers this his own authorship, meaning he considers that he can author how this election is going to turn out, calling for vote recounts in Florida and so forth. It's very convenient when your brother happens to be the governor of Florida. Wonder how those recounts are going to go. The vice president considers this his own authorship while not realizing that he is completely naked. He's got no chance of winning the election. The interim period decides the next victor. The interim period is that time between when the election ended and when the Supreme Court elected George, or selected George W. Bush, right? So this is when things really hit the bottom, because that's when he stole an election the second time. But you have a middle path here. If you go up the timeline, you have the physical rebirth for semi-enlightened people, the karmic evolution towards spiritual initiation. So this is the secondary path. The biggest path, the top path, when you go up to the king's chamber, you are now in the path of ascension. You're in the path of the messianic initiative in which you become the fulfillment of the Christ promise and you achieve spiritual escape from materiality, from being human and physical. Now, one of the interesting things the pyramid did is it put these stones in the way, and there are actually other stones that were in this part that were taken out that were made out of limestone, but these are granite, and they're much more solid. And there was a hidden lintel there, which meant that you couldn't even see that these were there. It just looked like the passage only went down. And it wasn't until that lintel fell off while they were setting off explosives in the pyramid to blow the hole into this, that they heard something fall, and that's when they realized there was something else. And they bored a hole through and found this. Because actually this entrance is not in the center of the pyramid. It's 286.1 inches off from the center, and that has a symbolism of the reincarnation of the spiritual messianic role. This whole pyramid is basically designed to tell you that this messianic figure is coming back, which is us. We're all the messianic figure. So the granite plug shows us that we cannot go up this path. Everybody on earth is going to have to go through the path of the dead. And that's why the pyramid is a tomb, because it symbolizes that we are going through that death. So you have to go into the subterranean chamber. You have to hit the pit, or at least see that it's there and not fall into it. Before you turn around, this is in your own personal life, the metaphor is, and you have to start crawling back up the subterranean passage, and you get to this point where you can bore a hole through the wall, and then you have this very interesting passageway that's called the forced passage. And what that represents is that you literally have to bore your way through to get up to this point where you can either go into the Queen's chamber, which is the path of organized religion, or the King's chamber, which is the path of true spiritual mastery. So this represents how you dig yourself out of trouble. The well shaft or grotto is the stopover point where you actually get to relax a little bit. And many of us have had to go through that. Another interesting thing you see here is that the year 1945 is very interestingly flagged by this structure, which looks very much like there's some sort of altar associated with it. Now, this is what it looks like from the side. It's actually very stretched out inside the chamber. The chamber has a long length going towards the back wall here. It's actually not so tight as you see here. But 1945 is right in the middle of this little statue arrangement. That's the end of World War II. It's a nice little break. You see that there's two equal pillars here, sort of like World War I and World War II. And that's kind of what it means. So now you have this whole area down here, which means that part of the world, part of the people in the world will continue to go through this suffering as time goes on. They're not going to immediately see what's happening. Once you start going towards the Queen's chamber, you have to climb your way through. This is the entrance to the Queen's chamber right here. If you want to go up into the King's chamber, you have to actually climb up these holes in the side, as you can see here. And this is the lifelike size of it. Now this is the Grand Gallery, as it's called. You're climbing up, and then this is the great step up here. And here's a diagram of them life-size going up. And the point that we're concerned with is right here. This represents, there's three little spots, as you can see from the side here, the grooves. But only one of them actually holds a piece of stone in it. And the stone has a symbol on it. And this symbol is the only symbol in the entire Great Pyramid that's like a little plaque that actually shows you something that means something. Okay? That's the only one. Other than this, which looks suspiciously similar to a pregnant woman's stomach. And that is not an accident. That's what it's meant to look like. It's meant to look like the earth giving birth. This is symbolic of the rainbow or the new sunrise. Guess what year in the timeline this is? 2012. The most important date encoded in symbol in the Great Pyramid, if you count 1 inch equals 1 year, is 2012. And it is encoded in this symbol, which represents the dawning of a new age, the sunrise, the rainbow, the fulfillment of the promise, because the rainbow is the bursting forth of color and light and love and majesty to the world that it had not been in before. The stone symbolizes trials that we have to go through, energetic walls that we have to pass through along the way. Now what I want to point out here here's where he actually talks about this and says, if you don't change the dating from 1 inch per year, the first Messianic Advent, where you just saw the symbol, is 2012. The second is the year 2030. The third is 2057, and the fourth is 2084. Now, what's 84 minus 12? 72. What does 72 mean? Who knows the answer? Bueller? Bueller? There are 72 years that it takes for the Earth to move through 1 degree of the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 25,920-year cycle that represents the end of the age. So it's interesting that if it takes 72 years to go through 1 degree, that the pyramid is describing a 72-year transitional process in which not only is 2012 important, but once we get through 2012, the next date that we're going to look at is 2030. And then we're going to look at 2057. So we're only going to have to wait another, 18 years after 2012 before we get to 2030. That's pretty cool. 2012 is predicted as the year in which whatever the second coming of Christ is supposed to be will happen. Now, isn't it interesting that if you take the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan and you take the Great Pyramid, that the square footage, the actual perimeter of the pyramid is exactly the same? The Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico, the Great Pyramid in Egypt. You have the Atlantic Ocean separating these cultures, which most people would say are completely different. But they both build pyramids. And they both have a calendar. The Egyptian calendar happens to be a lot more complex to understand because it's this whole timeline thing in a big pyramid. But they both have a calendar that flags the year 2012. Now, do you honestly think that that means we can just blow this thing off and it doesn't mean anything? Now we have the proof that both cultures on both sides of the Atlantic say that 2012 is going to be something spectacular. The people who built the Great Pyramid intended to give us a message. And it takes a solving of a mystery to figure out what the message is. You don't just get the answer spoon-fed to you like a little baby. If that was all it was, then it wouldn't involve the free will principle I was talking about. The free will principle is what allows us to have something to strive for. The free will principle is what makes us have to search for the information. And that's why this is cool, because this is an investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. You guys are dipping into the investigation while it's still in progress. I might find something else later on that's going to be really cool, and then I'm going to have to change the whole presentation around and work that in, and I do that all the time. The interesting aspect of how I fit in, for those of you who haven't seen this before, is that there is a remarkable similarity between myself and the historical figure Edgar Cayce, who was a 20th century mystic and psychic, who could be given someone's name and address, and through nothing else but that information, he was able to give their medical problems and a treatment without knowing anything about them. All he knows is their name and address, and they sit down in their house, thousands of miles away, potentially. He sits down, he goes into a trance, he starts speaking, he doesn't remember anything that he says, and when he wakes up, the guy who wrote it down says, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing because, we found out that this person has leukemia, and you said they have leukemia in your reading," and this was done over 14,000 times. So what you see here is a comparison between Cayce's astrology on the inside and my astrology on the outside. And what you see here is Sun over Sun, Venus over Venus, Mars over Mars, Moon over Moon. There's all these correlations between the planets. Superficially, they're in the same sign. You can see that the probability just of hitting the same sign, Pisces, Taurus, Capricorn, year of the ox, the same year of the Chinese zodiac, 1 out of 12, and the moon in the same degree, 1 out of 360. The likelihood of all this happening by chance is really, really unusual, especially because the only time that you get this close of an alignment with Cayce's birth planets, it only happens once in 127 years after he dies, which happens to be the exact time that I was born. It's a coincidence. And of course, there wouldn't be any facial similarity. That would be too obvious. So we can't give you that. You guys have probably seen this before, most of you, but obviously there's a tremendous facial similarity. You can see an extraordinary likeness. In fact, many people have said it's like the same guy, just put on a hat. And in Zurich, somebody actually gave me a bowler hat, and I recreated the famous slack-jawed pose. So, okay, 2012. Now you know that the Great Pyramid is talking about it. Now you know that the Mayan calendar is talking about it. You also may know that the zodiac has ages. The age of Aquarius, right? When does the age of Aquarius come in? 2012. And that's been calculated based on constellations in the sky by mainstream astronomers. So now you have a third correlation. Ages of the zodiac, the Great Pyramid timeline, and the end of the Mayan calendar all say the age of Aquarius, the shift of the ages, 2012, buckle your seatbelt. Something's going to happen. Something very cool and wonderful is going to happen. If you're scared, it's because you haven't solved the mystery. You don't even know that it's a mystery. The fear is what gets you looking for something that will make you not scared. Is this another ordinary time in history? Is there any scientific credibility to the idea that this is not just another year, but that there's something going on? Well, first of all, we're learning more and more about the idea that we are not alone in the universe. The most recent disclosures from mainstream media, this is February of this year, said that there could be 100 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone. Scientists are changing their tune. They're not talking the way they used to talk anymore. Remember in the old days where they're like, and I say old days, I mean only, 5 years ago? Well, we don't know if any other star has a planet around it. Maybe they got big gas giants like Jupiter, but we don't really know. Well, now we've had so many advances in looking at the planets with telescopes and such that we know that there are planets everywhere, that most stars do have planets. And now they're calculating that there could be 100 billion planets like the Earth. So that becomes a lot easier to conceptualize the idea that there's extraterrestrial life. The galaxy may be full of Earths and alien life, this CNN.com. Here's another 100 billion Earth-like planets in the galaxy alone. Here's another recent discovery that's very interesting. All blue-eyed people can be traced back to one ancestor who lived 10,000 years ago near the Black Sea. Guess what, guys? The white skin, the white people, if you will, are the most recent extraterrestrial DNA to come to the planet. Not the only, because hardly anybody on this planet is indigenous human, according to the traditions that we've encountered. But the most recent ET influx is white-skinned people. Everybody with blue eyes can be traced back to one single ancestor. Now, the Casey reading said that Edgar in his past life in Atlantis was known as Ra-Ta, that he was the guy who helped design and build the Great Pyramid with the cooperation of an extraterrestrial group called Ra, and that the reason why he was able to do all these magical things like channeling and being able to find out where to build the pyramid and being able to hear the words was that he was a hybrid. His mother was impregnated by a human extraterrestrial that had white skin. They'd never seen white-skinned people on Earth before. So, Edgar Casey's past life as Ra-Ta, it says in the readings, is very controversial, was the first white man on Earth. And if that was my past life, then that means I'm your daddy.
I'm your daddy.
Thank you very much. You have to be able to laugh at yourself. I mean, it's ludicrous for me to say that I was somebody else, and I don't. All I know is that there's a facial similarity. You can't deny that, okay? You can't deny that. You can't deny that there's an astrological similarity. Those are facts. You can't deny that I also have done readings like he did, and you can't deny that I put readings online that predicted events that happened in the future that actually came true, okay? And the Casey readings did predict that he would come back, and they said that he would be more like Ra-Ta than he was like Edgar. And Ra-Ta created a hall of records in which all the knowledge of Atlantis was put together for future races to use, for future people on Earth to use. The hall of records is accessed telepathically. And so what I've been doing is basically downloading the information from the hall of records that I knew back then and putting it together, and that's why we have information that's unlike anything else that you've seen, because it's all remembering. So the most powerful people in the world took the teachings that Edgar's past life as Rata helped to create and contorted it into a negative purpose. And so not only am I the daddy of all the white people, I'm also the father of the Illuminati. Yeah, that's really nice. Thanks for that, karma. The Illuminati have a tradition about a great prophet who they said was killed for his beliefs, and that he's the founder of all their spiritual teaching, and that legend that they teach in the very high levels of the Illuminati is identical to the Rata story. Okay? And they apparently inherited a prophecy that said that he was going to come back and help usher in a golden age, which they call the New World Order. Novus Ordo Seclorum, it's on the bottom. And that what they did is they inherited a positive prophecy about one of what the Casey reading said would be a team of liberators who would help change the planet. A team, not one person. All this stuff about one guy coming in and doing all this stuff is not true. The Great Pyramid speaks of Jesus coming in and speaks of him in very positive terms, but it also says this is a universal event for humanity's entire history. So it's not just about one religion, it's about something that benefits everyone. This time that we're in is a time of change, and it's a time in which we all get to experience that change together. We're all in this together, and each one of you are one of those liberators. If you're watching this video on the internet, or if you're in this room with me right now actually seeing this live, you are one of those people who has been charged with a responsibility to share what you know with the people. And yes, just like has happened to me, somebody is going to call you the Antichrist. It happened to you, apparently. Somebody is going to call you a Messiah. And that's not true either, because we're all here together to work on this stuff. There is no one savior figure, per se. Can I get an amen on that? All right. Look, the purpose is for us to come together and to find commonality between us. So the real working end of the 2012 prophecy, where we start to have the rubber meet the road, is looking at the solar system and seeing that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. That's called interplanetary climate change. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about. You're also going to see evidence very clear in the fossil record showing that in even intervals of 26 million years, every form of life on Earth spontaneously changes and upgrades from one type of creature to another. The DNA code itself gets rewritten, and I'm going to show you the evidence of how that happens. More recently, another cycle was discovered that's 62 million years in length. This cycle was discovered by Dr. Robert Rode, goes all the way back to the first single-celled organisms in the fossil record, 542 million years ago. 62 million year cycle. Now, what does this mean? What I believe this means is that the center of the galaxy is releasing waves of energy. And the way that you visualize this is think about dropping a rock into a stream or a still pond. You drop that rock into the pond, the surface makes a ripple. It's a circle, and it goes out. These are ripples of energy that slowly travel from the center of the galaxy, and they're structured like layers of an onion. And they're evenly spaced because it's all vibration. It's all harmonics. So as these evenly spaced walls shoot through the solar system, they reprogram the DNA on Earth. And all of the creatures on Earth are spontaneously transformed, as you see in the fossil record here. There's no evidence in many of these cases of cataclysms. There's just suddenly one species and then another one. And there's no transition. You have shellfish, like a clam, and then the skeleton's on the outside and the body's on the inside, and then what happened? That flesh is on the outside, skeleton's on the inside. There's no halfway creature where the flesh is halfway in and halfway out. You go from shellfish to bony fish, bang, just like that. It was spontaneously changed. And there are many, many of these dropped things in the fossil record where you can't see the difference. So, in order to understand 2012 and to make sense of these prophecies, what we really need to do is look back to the past, as we've already started, and get a sense of what was the technology of Atlantis, because I want to present to you the possibility that a technology doesn't necessarily involve machines with electrical circuits and gears and moving parts. A pyramid can be a technology. It can be a technology that operates as a machine just by sitting there, and as I said earlier, acting as a funnel for this fluid-like energy that makes all of matter as we know it. Obviously, you have the pyramid here. This is the second pyramid next to the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx in front. These are the casing stones, what's left of them on the top, which originally, as I said, were mirror-polished, white limestone. We now have an Atlantis-type city that was found under the ocean on the western tip of Cuba. And this was covered in the media briefly, but then the story was squelched. This is the actual side-scan sonar photographs of what was originally discovered. This was two scientists, Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig, who had been given a charter by the Cuban government to conduct side-scan sonar readings of the seafloor around Cuba, hoping to find sunken Spanish galleons with gold on them and treasure. And they promised that they would give the Cuban government a share of the profit. So that seems like a pretty good deal. You just give somebody permission to do these readings, and then lo and behold, if they find something, you get to make money. Now, the problem was that what they found was not treasure. It was much more valuable than just gold coins. It was actually pyramids and sphinxes and roads and buildings. Now, a three-dimensional reconstruction of what you see from the top down here has been built. So what you see here is the ruined platforms of giant buildings that are now a half a mile under the ocean. And we know, based on geology, that these structures could not have been above sea level any time earlier than 10,000 years ago. They're at least 10,000 years old, minimum. We know this is true. This should be the smoking gun of Atlantis. There was a contract made with National Geographic. This was all supposed to be released in the summer of 2003, but it got squelched. It never came out in the open, unfortunately. Here's Paulina Zalitsky in front of inscriptions that she found in the caves in Cuba that are very, very similar to what she saw in the Atlantean ruins that she was looking at with a submersible submarine that has a little camera in it. She actually saw inscriptions just like this. Now, these are the descriptions of those energy fields in the solar system. Remember I was telling you the galaxy gives off these rippling waves of energy and they come through the solar system? Well, the Atlanteans knew about that and they were drawing it. And so what you see is planets here with their ripples on it, and then that's the sun. Or that could be the galaxy. We're not really sure. She also found these inscriptions in the caves of Cuba, which would have just been the highland mountains of Atlantis. And these are identical to inscriptions that were found on the stones underneath the water. Now, this is the closest that she's ever come to actually showing us one of the pyramids. This is from actual footage that was taken from her submarine. It's the only picture that has ever been released to the public showing one of her pyramids. You can look at it up close and get a glimpse of what actually is a blunted top. It does not go in a straight line. Well, there is another example of that, and that's the bent pyramid of Dashur in Egypt. And so what we're seeing is very, very similar structure. Now, this is an enormous, enormous pyramid under the ocean in Cuba. So, anybody that tells you that Atlantis is full of crap, I just gave you photographic proof that it exists. So that argument has been shot. We know for a fact that pyramid could not have been above sea level could not have been above sea level unless it was at least 10,000 years old. At least. Given that information, what the heck did they know and why did they build these things everywhere they possibly could?